Now to go to sujood, or to go to Mukhtasar Tibyan fi Adabi Hamalat al-Qur'an of An-Nawawi. Today he discusses the affair of sujood al-tilawa. And An-Nawawi, in this part of the book, he goes into extreme detail regarding the affair of sujood al-tilawa. But because he goes into excessive or extreme detail regarding it, in which parts of it are in need of having knowledge of khilaf and other those affairs, I've decided to, instead of reading his speech, rahimahullah, to summarize it and to mention the main points and the main rulings of sujood tilawa. So sujood tilawa, number one, it is legislated. It comes from the narration of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Sahih Muslim, that he said that when the son of Adam recites the ayah of sajda and then falls down in prostration, the shaitan goes into seclusion and weeps and says, "Woe unto me! The son of Adam was commanded to prostrate, and he prostrated, and paradise was entitled to him, and I was commanded to prostrate, but I refused, and I am doomed to hell." This shows the legislation of sujood at-tilawa. Now the scholars have agreed that it is legislated. The scholars all agree that sujood at-tilawa is legislated. But they differed regarding its ruling. Is it wajib or is it mustahab? The correct stance of the scholars regarding this affair is that it is recommended and it is not wajib. It is recommended, it's not wajib. What's the evidence for that? The evidence is, it comes from Zayd ibn Thabit, radiallahu anhu, that one day he read to the Prophet ﷺ Surah An-Najm, and he did not prostrate, nor did the Prophet ﷺ instruct him to prostrate. And it is known, at the end of Surah An-Najm, there is a sajda. So the scholars get from this, as Imam Ibn Baz mentions, rahimahullah, that this indicates it is not obligatory, as the Prophet did not reject upon Zayd ibn Thabit for not prostrating. Rather, he let the affair go. This shows that if it was obligatory, the Prophet would have told him to make sure to prostrate. لا يجوز تأخير البيان إن وقت الحاجة. It's not allowed to delay the clarification in the time of need. At this time, when prostration is mentioned, he didn't tell him to prostrate, then it is not obligatory. Also, the statement of Umar radiallahu anhu Bukhari, where he gave a khutbah. One week he did the sujood, the tilawa, and the second week he didn't do so. And he said, we're commanded with sujood. Whoever does it, then he is correct and he has done good. And whoever does not do so, there's no sin on him. There's no sin on him. This last part, there's no sin on him. The scholars that get from this, that sujood tilawa is not obligatory. How many sujoods are there in the Qur'an? Then the scholars that mentioned there's 15 of them. In 15 places, there is sujood mentioned in the mushaf, or sujood should be done in the mushaf. There's no more than that. Ibn Hazm rahimahullah has relayed a consensus that there's only 15 max. That there's 15 max. Now, Shaykh ibn Baz rahimahullah mentioned that these 15 places, all of it is sunnah to prostrate in it. If he makes sujood, that is better. If he does not do so, there is no sin on him and no blame on him. Tayyib. There's 15. But some scholars, they say that it has only been authentically reported from the Prophet ﷺ that he prostrated in 4 places. That he prostrated in 4 places. Number 1, in Surah Sad. In Surah Sad. Also in Surah An-Najm. Also in Surah Al-Inshiqaq. And also in Surah Al-Alaq. They say these are the 4 places where the Prophet ﷺ prostrated. These are where we have a hadith that is authentically reported that the Prophet prostrated in these 4 places. For that reason, Imam Muqbil's stance was that sujood should only be done in these 4 places. But he said if someone does in the rest of the 11 places, there's no problem. There's no problem and it's not rejected on him. Then they mention what is the ruling of sujood tilawa from the sense that is it a must that you have wudu? And is it a must that you face the qibla? And is it a must that you cover your awrah? And it is a must that you be clean in your body, in your place of where you are. Majority of the scholars say that sujood at-tilawa is salah. They say sujood at-tilawa takes the same rulings as salatul nafila, as the voluntary prayer. This was their stance. Majority of the scholars say this stance. So they say, you must have wudu, you must cover your awrah, you must face the qibla, and your body must be clean, your clothes must be clean, and the place you're in must be clean to perform the sujood tilawa. Based on this opinion, they say that, for example, if a woman is going to do sujood tilawa, she's at home in her regular clothes, what she must do? She must put on the clothes for her prayer. She cannot make sujood tilawa in those regular clothes. Based on this stance, showing us the implications of this stance. Other scholars though, they didn't agree to that. They said that sujood tilawa is not salah. And from those who supported this stance with strength, is Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. His stance was, sujood tilawa is not salah. Sujood tilawa should not be called salah. And why does he say this? Number one, they say that the Prophet ﷺ said, La salata liman lam yaqra' bi fatihatil kitab. There's no prayer in which Fatiha is not read in it. Do you read Surah Fatiha and Sujood tilawa? No. Number two, they say it comes from Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, miftahu salati at-tuhur wa tahrimuha at-takbir wa tahliluha at-taslim. That the key to the prayer is purification. And that which makes everything haram in the salah is the takbir. And to free yourself from that is taslim. Is there taslim and takbir in sujood tilawa? No. So they say it doesn't resemble the prayer. The prayer has qira'ah, the prayer has takbir, and it has taslim. Sujood tilawa has none of these affairs. So because it has none of these affairs, we cannot call it a salah, even a nafila salah. For that reason, Shaykh al-Islam, although he took this stance, he did say purification is better to have. He says it's better, but to make it a condition that you cannot make sujood tilawa except with wudu, he said this is not right. And for that reason, they say that tahara, purification, is not a condition for sujood at-tilawa. Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, he mentioned some of the scholars have gone towards a stance that it is not a prayer. And they said because the definition of prayer does not apply to it. What's the definition of prayer? We said there must be qira'ah, there must be takbir to enter into it, and there must be taslim to exit from it. So he says here, since it has not been affirmed the sunnah that it has a takbir or taslim, the narration regarding it only come in it that they made sujood. This narration come, فَسَجَدَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ فَسَجَدْنَا. The Prophet did sujood, so we prostrate as well. The Prophet made sujood, so we prostrate as well. As for takbir, it has not come from the Prophet in an authentic chain that he made takbir for it. As for taslim, there hasn't even come a weak narration that the Prophet made taslim for sujood tilawa. Based on that, he said it cannot be called a salah. Thus, a person can do sujood tilawa without wudu, without covering the awrah, without facing the qibla, and without purifying himself from ritual impurities. Based on this stance, if a woman is ha'id, or a person in major impurity, he can make sujood tilawa. He can make sujood tilawa because it's not a condition. It's not a condition. Now, those who say it's like voluntary prayer, they say it is a must-have wudu, and the rest of the four affairs we mentioned. Ash-Shawkani also mentioned that it is not come in any narrations regarding sujood tilawa which indicates that one should prostrate having wudu. Those who are present during recitation would prostrate with him, and it has not been reported they commanded anyone from amongst them to be in a state of wudu. Rather, it comes in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he made sujood tilawa, he made sujood, and everyone around him made sujood, even the mushrikun. And he says, yeah, that's his evidence. He says, the mushrikun, they are impure, and even if they made wudu, it doesn't count from them. And they made the sujood. Showing us here, tahara is not a condition for sujood at-tilawa, nor the rest. Ibn Hazm, he mentioned, is not a condition to face the qibla and sujood at-tilawa. Imam Muqbili said, it's not a condition to have purification, face the qibla, or cover the awrah in sujood at-tilawa. So this is where, if a person, he wants to make sujood tilawa, he doesn't have to go make wudu. Or he doesn't have to, example, he's reading Qur'an, he's walking down the street reading Qur'an, and or he's in the masjid just reading Qur'an, and the sujood tilawa comes up, he just does sujood. He doesn't have to go make wudu if he doesn't have wudu. He doesn't have to cover his awrah if it's not covered, example, he's at home. Or like this. Now, who should make sujood tilawa? Who should prostrate? As for the imam in the prayer, if he prostrates, then everyone behind him has to prostrate. إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الْإِمَامُ لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ فَإِذَا كَبَّرَ فَكَبِّرُوا. The imam is placed there for you to follow him. If he makes takbir, make takbir. فَإِذَا رَكَعَ فَرْكَعُوا. If he makes ruku', do ruku'. فَإِذَا سَجْدَ فَاسْجُدُوا. And if he does sujood, make sujood. So if the imam in the salah makes sujood tilawa, you must follow him. You must follow him in that. As for outside the prayer, then if someone is reciting the Qur'an, and he goes through a verse of sujood tilawa, and there's someone around him who's paying attention to his recitation, and he makes sujood, then this person should make sujood with him. This person should make sujood with him. But if a person is not paying attention to his recitation, then he doesn't have to make sujood. He doesn't have to make sujood. Ibn Qudama, he says it is sunnah for the reciter and the mustami'. What's al-mustami'? Al-mustami' is the one who's listening attentively. As-sami' is the one who's not listening attentively. So if you're listening attentively to the person reciting the Qur'an and he makes sujood, you should make sujood as well with him. And that is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But the one who's not listening attentively, then it is not, he doesn't have to make sujood tilawah, he can continue with his affairs. The scholars mention that the sujood here is not connected to that of the reciter. What does that mean? If you make sujood tilawah outside of the salah, you don't have to wait for the person who made sujood tilawah first to raise his head up. You can raise your head up before him. You don't have to wait for him. So let's say the person is reading the Qur'an, you're listening to him, he makes sujood tilawah, and you make sujood tilawah. Are you allowed to raise your head before him? Yes, you're allowed to raise your head before him. There's no connection between your sujood and his sujood in regards to that. You can raise your head before him. Neither do you have to be in front of him. You can be behind him. You could be to his side. And you don't have to make a saf. You don't have to make a road. Any position you're in, you can make sujood tilawah. But if the person reciting does not prostrate, then the one listening does not do it either. The person reciting doesn't prostrate, then the one listening doesn't do it either. As perceived in the hadith of Zayd bin Thabit, that he didn't prostrate, so the Prophet also did not prostrate with him. And this is better, and this is the sunnah of the Prophet. What about one who reads the sujood, the verse of sujood, just to make sujood? One day he says, I'm just going to read the Qur'an, the 15 verses, the space of sujood, I'm going to make sujood like that. The scholars, they say this is disliked and this is not from the sunnah of the Prophet to do this. Some people, the shaitan beautifies to them different kinds of affairs of worship, and they think that they're doing something good. وَكَمْ مِن مُرِيدٍ لِلْخَيْرِ لَمْ يُصِبْهُ. As Ibn Mas'ud said, how many people they thought they were doing good, they didn't attain good. They wanted to go, but they didn't attain good. If this was something which was legislated, that you just open the Mus'haf of the place sujood, just to make sujood, the Sahaba would have done it first. Before them, the Prophet ﷺ would have done it. But because none of the Salaf did and the Prophet didn't do it, is not something which is recommended, rather is disliked. طيب. The next affair, if a person is praying alone, and he goes through a verse of prostration, then it is recommended for him to do sujood. And some of the scholars they mentioned, they only recommend in those 4 places we mentioned. For that reason, it comes always an affair of on Jum'ah. On Jum'ah, what surah you're supposed to read? Surah Sajda. And surah هل أتى على الإنسان. Some masjids, if you don't prostrate in that part, they get upset. Because sujood comes in Surah Sajda. But it comes from some of the scholars, like Ibn Hajar and them, that they say the Prophet never prostrated on Jum'ah in that salah. If the Prophet had prostrated on Jum'ah in Salatul Fajr during Surah Sajda, would have been reported to us? Obviously it would have been reported to us. The Sahaba reported everything. The Sahaba, they reported even the ways of how cleanliness is done and how the Prophet taught them. You don't think something that occurs on Jum'ah, Surah Sajda, that the Prophet would have been reported? It would have been reported to us. For that reason, the correct stance is on Surah on Jum'ah, that is not something that is sunnah to prostrate at that instance. But if a person does it, there's no problem. But it's not someone could say it's sunnah to prostrate at that instance. But it is, if someone does it, no problem. Now, if he prostrates, that is good in the salat, especially in those 4 areas we mentioned. Now, if the Imam forgot to do sujood tilawah though, let's say the Imam, he forgot to do sujood tilawah, went into ruku'. Whilst he's in ruku', he remembers, oh, I didn't do sujood tilawah. What does he do this? What does he do then? Go to sujood? Who says he goes to sujood? No one says he goes to sujood. If he goes to sujood, salah is batil. If he goes to sujood, the scholars say his salah is nullified. Rather, he stays in ruku' and he continues his prayer because sujood tilawah is not wajib. Sujood tilawah is not wajib. They say if he goes into sujood in this case, his salah is nullified. طيب. The next affair which occurs, if the Imam prostrates, then the one following should prostrate. But let's say the one following is not really following the Imam. Some people, unfortunately, in salah, it's like they're sleeping. The Imam is in one position, he's in a different position. He's not paying attention. إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الْإِمَامِ لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ. The Imam is there for you to follow him, not for you to make up acts in the salah. So for example, the Imam goes into ruku' instead of going sujood tilawah. But the one behind him is intelligent. He says sujood tilawah, so I'm going to go in sujood. Doesn't even care what the Imam's position is. He goes straight in sujood. What does he do in this case? In this case, if he realizes his mistake, he has to stand right back up. And then he goes into ruku' and he follows the Imam from there, and there's nothing on him after that. If he did this by mistake, if he did this on purpose, his salah is nullified. If he did this on purpose, salah is nullified. طيب. Then he says, he discusses the affair of what if the Imam got up and started reciting again, and then the person realized, or example, he went into ruku' instead of going sujood, the Imam was in sujood. The Imam was in sujood, and he was in ruku'. What should he do? And he forgot, and he didn't realize that the Imam got up and started reciting again. In this case, he has to stand right back up and continue salah. And continue salah with the Imam. And this is the fatwa of Shaykh Ibn Baz. He says in the case, he should stand up. Once he stands, he should go into ruku' and follow the Imam, and nothing else on him in the first affair. And that is because he did out of mistake. Is that clear? Was mentioned. Because this occurs on Friday sometimes. If you go sometimes on Jum'ah, and the Imam doesn't make sujood, you find 20 of the people behind him in sujood. Why? Because it says sujood tilawah. He doesn't know sujood tilawah is not obligatory, and you find him in sujood. Or you find sometimes the Imam goes in sujood, and the person behind him, he's in ruku'. He doesn't realize till later. Some benefits regarding this affair, the sujood tilawah should be done right after the verse of tilawah. Once you get a verse of tilawah, you should make sujood. Some people, they have a misunderstanding. They read the part of the Qur'an where sujood is, and then they say, when I finish my qira'ah, then I'll do sujood tilawah. No, sujood tilawah is done right when you reach that instance. What if you're in a sitting, an example, you're given a tafsir of sujood tilawah, and you mention it once, and you do sujood tilawah. Now you're going to mention it 10 more times. You got to keep doing sujood? No, it comes authentic from Mujahid, that if you read a sajda, it suffices you from doing sajda another time. If you do sajda once in that sitting, it suffices you from doing sajda another time in that sitting. Another question arises, can I do sujood tilawah in the times when it is disliked to pray in? You know, the times when it's disliked to pray in, can I do sujood tilawah at that time? Some of the scholars, they say that you cannot do sujood tilawah at that time. Anyone know why? Because they consider it to be salah. Because those scholars say sujood tilawah salah, so it takes a ruling of salah in those times it is disliked or haram to pray in. You cannot do sujood tilawah those times. But as you mentioned, the correct stance is that sujood tilawah is not salah, and you could do it at any time. Even if a person takes that stance, we say, dhawatul asbab, those salah that have a reason for you to do so, you could pray at those times. Example, you enter the masjid in one of those times, you could do tahiyatul masjid at that time. Right or wrong? So for that reason, in any case, it is allowed. For that reason, San'ani, Ash-Shawkani, others mentioned, there's no disliking regarding sujood tilawah in those instances. Tayyib. Another question arises, what does an elderly person or sick one do who cannot do sujood? Some elderly people, they cannot bend their back. Some sick people, because the sickness they may have, they cannot bend their back. What do? Can they do ruku' instead? No. Ruku' does not take the place of sujood. But what do? They do ima'an. They indicate with the sujood. They indicate their sujood. They indicate instead of doing ruku'. Ruku' doesn't replace sujood. Rather, they indicate in this case because they are excused from making the full sujood. With all of this being said, if a person now asks, how do you do sujood tilawah? Some of the rules we mentioned, how does a person do sujood tilawah? Then sujood tilawah, while you're reciting, you go straight into sujood. But someone says, but I heard you should say Allahu Akbar. And that you should stand up and then say Allahu Akbar. Some of the scholars, they say a person should say Allahu Akbar before going to sujood tilawah. And the evidence was, and this is in salah, we'll discuss first the affair of salah. In salah they said that if you're going to go to sujood tilawah in salah, you say Allahu Akbar and then you go into sujood. And then when you raise from sujood tilawah, you say Allahu Akbar. They use as evidence that the Prophet ﷺ in every rafi' or khafd, every time raising and lowering in the prayer, he would say Allahu Akbar. From them who took this stance was Imam Al-Uthaymeen. Other scholars like Abu Hanifa, Imam Al-Albani and Imam Muqbil, they said there is no takbir for sujood tilawah, not inside the prayer, not outside the prayer. They say rather, a person in the prayer, if he goes to a part of sujood, he just goes into sujood. Some may find this strange. Well, how would the person behind him know? Well, if the person behind him is following the Imam, he would know. The problem with us is now, we're not following the Imam in most of our cases. We're sleeping or our head is somewhere else. We don't know what the Imam is doing. The Sahaba, they were looking at the Prophet ﷺ when he was praying Salah. They knew his recitation by the movement of his beard. So this reason is not something that the Prophet would say Allahu Akbar and go into sujood tilawah, because they're following the Prophet ﷺ. So in Salah, even in Salah, you don't have to say Allahu Akbar to go to sujood tilawah, nor do you have to say Allahu Akbar to come back up. Say, someone says, how will I know if he came back up? How do you know? Recitation. He starts reciting, right or wrong? You hear recitation, that means he got back up. So does he have to say Allahu Akbar to inform you that he's back up? No, he doesn't. So that's where these scholars, they say the stance that you don't have to say Allahu Akbar. As for raising the hands and going to sujood tilawah, there's no evidence for that. There's no evidence to raise the hands to go into sujood tilawah. The only 4 places where there's evidence to raise the hands is well known. Takbiratul ihram, going to ruku', rising up from ruku' again, and when rising up from the to the middle, the 2 rak'ahs. But sujood tilawah, there's no evidence that the Prophet rose his hand to go into sujood tilawah. طيب. Outside the prayer though, some of the people, they'll tell you to go in sujood tilawah, you have to stand up, say Allahu Akbar, then go in sujood tilawah. Shaykh Al-Albani said that this in reality is making hardship upon a Muslim that Allah did not make hard upon him. وَمَا جَعْلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah didn't make any hardship upon you in the religion. This is putting a hardship that neither did Allah and His Messenger make upon a Muslim. For that reason he says, if you are standing, then go straight into sujood, without any sitting. And if you are sitting, then go into sujood without any standing. Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen mentions, if a person tells you that in order to go sujood tilawah, you must stand up and say Allahu Akbar, who has to provide the evidence here? The one who's obligating you to do an act of worship that Allah did not obligate you to do. So here we say to him, provide us an evidence that we have to do this. If there's no evidence, then the generality is the Prophet ﷺ made sujood, or made sujood with him. No one stood up. No one said Allahu Akbar, they just made sujood. طيب. Then he says, then the other affair is that once he prostrates, he should do like every other prostration. What does that mean? He should prostrate on his 7 limbs. He should prostrate on his 7 limbs. That's because the hadith of Ibn Abbas. Anyone know what the 7 limbs are? What's the 7 limbs you're supposed to prostrate on? The forehead, including what? But the forehead includes what? Al-wajh wa ashara biyadihi ila al-anf. The forehead, and he indicated towards his nose as well. So the nose must touch with the forehead. Then the 2 palms, the 2 rukbatayn, the 2 knees, wa atraf al-qadamayn, and the fingertips of the toes, and the toes, the toes. This shows us that sujood tilawah is the same thing. You must prostrate on those 7. You must prostrate on the 7. What is said in sujood tilawah? Then there's no authentic dua to be said, except that is the same as other sujood. Subhan Rabbil A'la. Can you make dua in sujood tilawah? Yes. Shaykh Ibn Baz said you can make dua in sujood tilawah, because it's sujood. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَأَمَّا السُّجُودُ فَأَكْثِرُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الدُّعَاءِ فَقَمِنَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ. As for sujood, increase in it of dua, for it is more likely dua be answered. Sujood tilawah is a sujood. Yes, it's not a prayer, but it is a sujood. Once he is done, inside the prayer, as we mentioned, he just stands up. As for outside the prayer, he just gets up. He doesn't have to say Allahu Akbar. Doesn't have to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Nor does he have to do that tahiyyat. Some people, you see, they do sujood tilawah, they sit up, they do tahiyyat, and then they say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and like this. There's no evidence for this. Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah rahimahullah mentions, it has not been reported from the Prophet or any of his companions that they did taslim for sujood tilawah. That they did taslim for sujood at-tilawah. Shaykh al-Islam has a famous statement. He said, وَسُجُودُ الْقُرْآنِ لَا يُشْرَعْ فِيهِ التَّحْرِيمُ وَلَا تَحْلِيلٌ. The sujood of the Qur'an, there's no legislative for it. At-tahrim. What does tahrim here mean? Saying Allahu Akbar. وَلَا tahleel. What does he mean? Saying as-salam. What is saying as-salam? Also, there's no evidence that it has tashahhud, as you mentioned. طيب, a person may ask inside the prayer, when I'm getting up from sujood tilawah, should I do jalsa to istiraha? Is jalsa istiraha legislated for sujood tilawah? No. And this, I know he mentioned bi-ittifaq al-ulama. I know he mentions by consensus, without any differing, that there's no jalsa istiraha, the sitting of rest, to get up from sujood tilawah. These are affairs that many of us, if we don't learn, we're ignorant of. And we may be doing things thinking that we're doing something which is sunnah, but in reality is opposed to the consensus of the scholars. If he's in the prayer, if he's in prayer and he gets up, what are the situations he has? You did sujood tilawah in the prayer. Now you got up from sujood tilawah. You have 2 options. Option number 1, you continue reciting. You continue reciting. Then whenever you want to go to ruku', you go into ruku'. Option number 2, you stand up and you go straight into ruku'. That's the 2 options you have. Number 1, you continue reciting. Number 2, you stand up and you go into ruku'. So for that reason, the scholars have mentioned the situations of a person in salah with regards to sujood tilawah is 3. Number 1, that he goes to a verse of sujood tilawah and he does not stop and he continues to read. He doesn't do sujood tilawah, he just continues to read. That's allowed. It's jaiz, it's allowed. The second case is he makes sujood, but when he stands up, he continues to read, then he makes ruku'. And the third situation is he makes sujood, then he gets up and goes into ruku' without reading more. And these are 3 situations with this. And regarding the affair of sujood tilawah, for this covered most of its rulings, although there's rulings that are more detailed and that have some implication regarding different affairs. But in general, these are majority of the rulings that Imam An-Nawawi mentioned in sujood, regards sujood at tilawa. If any quick question now, I'll take. If not, yes.